Witte, che è appunto il fondatore. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce you Bart De Witte. Please, Bart. Hi, Bart. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Federico. Buongiorno, Italia. My name is Bart De Witte. I live in Berlin, in Germany, and Italians and Germans have something in common. We rank on the top 3 list of the AI and democracy list of the world list. So we are really good in looking at AI and democracy. And I think in times now, I traveled yesterday, I think it was 14 hours because the airport in Berlin was closed. And I was spending 10 hours on a train with refugees. And I think democracy and building our future hasn't been more important today as it is now. So I think when we build something as important as AI for healthcare, for me, and I use this image from a Japanese artist, we have to look that we do this in an inclusive way. And we need to see that when we build AI for healthcare, that we don't have the inequalities that we have seen today. And I will start with a German professor for sociology from Munich. He wrote a book called Muster. I don't know if it's translated in English, but it would be patterns. And he looked at a very different perspective on digitalization, and he said, digitalization is nothing else as the duplication of the world through data. And that made me thinking, what does that mean when we duplicate our world through data? Because when data is now following capital concentrations, so data accumulations are somehow connected to capital concentrations, what does that mean for the future? And normally, digitalization tries to solve a problem. So if you duplicate the world, like for instance, Tesla, who is simulating the world to train the AI to have all sort of traffic situations that in normal life you wouldn't see, they're duplicating that for solving the problem of autonomous driving. And when we look at healthcare, we simulate already since a long time. We could, based on the computing power that we had, it was really in a minuscule way, but now we can already simulate on a cell level biology, and that's going to change and transform everything. So that's for solving a lot of problems that are related to healthcare. And last year, AlphaFold, but there was another project, RosettaFold, published a database with the whole human proteome as an open source database. So a replication of all the proteins in our body as a replication or duplication through data of biology. But then there are other ways or other duplications, and that's what touched me as well. But what if we duplicate human life? And there was this experiment from a woman that lost her daughter, and she never could say goodbye to her daughter, and she participated in this really strange project because they used all the data of her daughter to simulate in a virtual reality her daughter. And I'm just going to show that video. There is no tone?
엄마 어디 있었어?
엄마 항상
엄마 내 생각했어?
맨날
아니
해.
엄마 많이 보고 싶었어.
I don't want to watch this longer because it always makes me want to cry when I see a mother trying to grab her deceased daughter. But it already shows how real duplication through data is becoming, because this was a living person. This was the daughter of that mother. And there are other startups like Replica who also play with the game of replicate yourself. Now, this is a company that demands or asks you to upload all your communication data, and you get a chatbot that is actually duplicating your own behavior. The only thing what they don't say too much is if you look at the terms and conditions of that app, you don't own the AI model. So you give all your data, and the replication of your own self is not owned by you, but owned by the company. And I find that very worrisome because that is touching on a lot of fundamental rights. And we all know that there is going to be a huge explosion of people who want to simulate or duplicate the universe called the metaverse. And if you look at Meta, the company, they're going tenfold wider in their aims to collect data. They ask all sorts of biometrical data to build your avatar. And the company is not really well known in allowing us to own our own data. So a lot of ethical questions here related to that kind of perspective. And so I asked myself the question after I read that book. It's like, what is the kind of duplication we need? Because if we duplicate a world, we don't duplicate only data, we duplicate values, we duplicate norms, we duplicate culture, and we duplicate everything. And I have the feeling that at the moment we are duplicating only one kind of vision, a vision that comes from a region that has not so much relationships with my values when it comes to healthcare. And I'm a sci-fi nerd, so I watched a Netflix series, and I'm going to show you an abstract of that, of altered carbon. It's 250 years in the future, and you see in that video 2 flying cars. They have skyscrapers 3,000 meters high, and you can plug out your consciousness and put it into another body. So everything is there from what we dream of technology. But then there is this scene when they come to the hospital. I need some help here.
Put her finger on the scanner.
So his wife is bleeding to death.
You need to pay for services.
And they
I'm
are
sorry,
being
but Ms.
rejected.
Ortega has insufficient resources for specialized treatment. I'm sorry, but Ms. Ortega has insufficient resources for specialized treatment.
She's just gonna let her die?
Of course not. We don't turn anyone away. We'll help her as soon as we can. I just assumed that.
Yeah.
Please, right this way.
And that made me think that narrative of the future of health is so connected to the values that are perhaps not so connected to my values, because if you look at the surgery later, there is nearly no human involved, everything is automated. And I said, how the hell didn't they solve the problem of access to healthcare? And that has to do most probably with the norms and the values of a system. And if you compare the US with European health values, then we are very different. In Europe, you have a multi-class healthcare system. There are people who can't afford their insulin anymore because the price has gone up 1,200% over the last 20 years. There is a very different market behavior in the US. They use 18% of their GDP. And I think in Europe, we have a different kind of system, which is based on different values and different norms, but most of all on solidarity. And we don't want to have monopoles. We want Europe to flourish in every corner of Europe, so we get stability in our society. So the problem with this and how this could happen, I think, is really related to the core on how we look at data. And at the moment, we are looking at data as being a commodity. And what that means, being a commodity, is that we forget about all the other values that data can create, but only look at the economical value. And that can be nice, people can do that, but I would like to see a future where we also use the value of data to create social value, because that's what healthcare is about. It's about solidarity, it's about creating a social structure that we all can profit from in the case when we need it. And it's so strange that we are now in this discussion that we have to fight against the commodification of data, whereas when the Human Genome Project in the beginning of 2000 and last century started, there was this huge dispute because we were duplicating human biology for the first time in an open source project where 20 different countries participated in. And something really special happened during the time. There was a company, a biotech, which was already on the stock exchange, which was valued with billions. They were patenting the human genome. At the same time, there was an open source project. And then this happens. I never thought I would give him stage, but this happened. There was an agreement between Europe and the US how we look at human genome data.
We, all of us, share a duty to ensure that the common property of the human genome is used freely for the common good of the whole human race.
And then I think by myself, wow, if Tony Blair and Bill Clinton said that a human genome is a common good, what the hell happened in the last 20 years? Because now we are discussing about, well, data is going to create $1 billion market in healthcare. And I said, like, perhaps we could look different at this in the future. Because for me, data is not a commodity. For me, data is life. Data is a reflection of human life. Just as we saw with the South Korean mother that duplicated her daughter. So we have to think what kind of world we create, that we avoid creating a world that is similar to the problems we had with social media. And then people tell me, when we open source and make it a common good, we lose the economical opportunities. And I said, bullshit, sorry. Because there are studies that by opening up the human genome, we got nearly $1 trillion of economical value extraction out of that. It doesn't mean when you open things up that you lose the economical extraction. No, you incentivize collaboration and you let much more people being able to use the technology for building solutions and solving problems. I always ask myself, is there anybody even who tried to patent the alphabet? And if that would happen, how much books would have been published? I think we have to really watch out on what we try to commodify and what we create as open. And I think that has all to do with the mindset at the end, because I think the mindset is based in healthcare on scarcity. We have a scarcity mindset, just as we saw with that Altered Carbon science fiction movie. That was a scarcity mindset. There doesn't have to be scarce. That robot surgeon doesn't cost anything compared to these flying cars. But why wasn't this affordable? Because it was made scarce. And then you put up an economical value on top of that scarcity. And I think we need to rethink economics in healthcare, and we need to rethink going away from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of fully abundance, and then create a new kind of value extraction. And you can do this because you can see it, all these technologies that are driving us. If it's the storage that we need, the compute power that we need, if it's the price for training an AI model, all these prices are going down, except of the price of data. Data is being bought through startup acquisitions that have never made any revenue. I think the best example was WhatsApp. There was 19 billion acquisition cost just for a lot of users and data. And I think we have to really watch out, because we have so much promise here that we can break down inequalities, but then we have to look at data in a very different way, because if we commodify it, it's going to be different. We're going to keep up that scarcity mindset. And I think when we look at the future of AI, which is kind of promising, we will not maximize the benefits of AI for society, social values, not only economical values. And then you can ask what happens when we have AI models that can really compute with as much synapses as the brain has. And then you can see already what's happening in the space of coding and programming, because we have GPT-3, which is a large transformer model that has 175 parameters, and they used all the open source data from GitHub. And suddenly we have an AI that allows programmers to be assisted, and it's already doing so much work that my friends who are full stack coders tell, I use 20% less of my time using that AI. And that's promising, but not if it's monopolized by a single company using the open source data of others. And there are huge issues with that. So technologies are exponential and can improve life a lot. But the question will be, how do we do this so we can do this in an inclusive way? And I think everything has to do with changing the mindset and having an open collaboration form. And I'm going to ask you a question. So imagine that I ask you to set up an organization that has 70,000 people and is available in 42 countries or active in 42 countries and develops products for protective equipment for COVID, because that's what we needed during the time, and delivers over 1 million goods a week. And I will tell you, you have to do that in these 1 million pieces of goods in 8 weeks from now. And then I tell at the end, there was a small detail, I have no budget. You would probably think I'm a complete nutcase asking you to do that. But that's actually what happened at the beginning of COVID on the 11th of March. I had a friend in Berkeley, and we had a call. We said, like, what do we need? We need ventilators, we need protective equipment. And then we did a call on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and we grouped people with a shared purpose. A shared purpose because we had a shared enemy. And within 80 days, we had produced over, with that group, not we, the group, the collective, over 1 million pieces of 3D printed goods out of designs that were never existed before. And that whole group created over 1 year nearly 43 million pieces, just by joint collaboration on digital platforms with shared purpose, without any barriers. And that was beautiful because it shows the promise on how we can collaborate when we have a different purpose. And I think there is a lot of promise in these kind of collaborations. We could at the end produce 60% of the goods needed for treating COVID patients at the time. And people started to print other things that hospitals need. There was a hospital in France who installed 80 3D printers and is now looking which goods they don't have to import anymore, because we have a huge problem, the carbon footprint of supply chains, and to see how can we use the technology to have a cradle-to-cradle economy in a local base using these kind of technologies. And the promising thing was it was cheaper. We could produce cheaper goods because of the supply and demand that was broken, but that was not broken, the market was broken, but it wasn't broken in terms of the materials. So it was cheaper, and it showed the power of open source collaboration. And there were oxygen concentrators that had one design, went to the next design, and then suddenly companies in India, when there was no oxygen anymore, started productizing these goods and selling them for a price which was lower than the imported oxygen concentrators from China. So that was crazy. We never expected it when we posted that group that suddenly these open collaboration forums would exist. But it was all driven by shared purpose. And there were other beautiful things. There was a project called COVID Moonshot, which is using folding at home technology that uses synthesizes molecules, put them under open source licenses, and suddenly you see things happening that nobody believed that they could happen. And I tell that, okay, when the hell are we starting to collaborating instead of competing when it comes to healthcare? And I think perhaps Russia and China and the US and Europe collaborate when Death Star is threatening to destroy the world. I don't think that the image of a joint enemy is always the right thing to do, but you see it now. We never have been so united in Europe because of the threat of Russia. Do we need a threat, and what is that threat over 10 years? And for me, that threat is huge health inequalities based on information asymmetries. And the beauty is that there is so much proof that even in the drug development process, the Chinese open sourced the data set, and only 2 weeks later, it was Moderna putting their drug in phase 1 clinical trial, and 1 year later, it went to market. We never have seen so much rapid change. And most of it was due to the openness of the collaboration, not because people were building walls. I live in Berlin. We don't like walls. It took us a long time to break that wall. So we should not start building walls to collaborate. So there was a huge advantage for being open. And I talked to 50 CEOs of large meta companies, and I did interviews with their design teams and R&D teams. And I discovered something really strange, that more than 50% of the R&D cost doesn't make them more competitive. They all have the not invented here syndrome. They don't, like in software, you don't do that. You look at open source projects on GitHub and you replicate them. But in medtech, everybody's building their own systems. And I think there's time for building more together on an open source layer, so you have more R&D budget to work on what we call the experience economy. And then people ask me, can you then create value? Now, JP Morgan just announced that they see that the metaverse is going to be a $1 trillion opportunity. So if you think by open sourcing AI and open sourcing data, you cannot create economical value to create a mindset of abundance, I think you lack of fantasy and you lack of creativity, because if you can do that in the metaverse, you can for sure do that in healthcare. And there is proof for that. There is a company called Open Bionics. They use open source designs, 3D printed, that are 1/4 cheaper than the proprietary prosthesis from a German company. And Ottobock is a 100-year-old company. Everything what they develop is proprietary, in-house, closed, IP protected. Then Open Bionics has everything open source and a shell of 10%, which is their differentiator. And they can deliver their goods decentralized using 3D printers in hospitals, and they do that much cheaper and are much more competitive, and they can give access to people, to prosthetics, who never could have afforded these prosthetics. So these are the kind of models we have to look into. I think open source is going to be one of the building blocks to create that more equitable society, because you can act and tap into global communities that share things. So we need to go away from a mindset of scarcity, and you need to go to and move towards a mindset of abundance. And that is all to do with our thinking. We need to go away of that protectionism and letting go, and that's really, really hard, because that's what I'm trying to do with my foundation. How do you create open source medical AI? I had no clue when I started that, but I knew that there was a huge issue with data. Data is not global, data is local, there are no global data sets, so data is biased, data is becoming a commodity. The AI models are closed. Everybody talks about the black box, the technical black box, but that's not the problem. The legal black box is the problem, because if you try to open it, you can't. There is no way to replicate it through peer reviewing. So there was a lot of issues with data. It's like, let's try to solve that problem by open sourcing it. And the main layer, what we try to do is create data solidarity. And data solidarity doesn't work when we open our data and talk about open data, and the industry doesn't open their data, because that's not solidarity. That is data appropriation. That is something very much different. So we started an NGO, which is a non-profit, that focuses on the European EU framework, which is based on the Digital Governance Act. And the Digital Governance Act gives us a framework to build a framework for building data as commons. And it's called data altruism. So what we do is we start campaigns with patients. We shout out for people to donate their data. We get consent. We are playing with reverse consent. We get already data that has consent. We unify the data. We do the data engineering, and then we liberate the data. But we do one special thing. We put a copyleft license on their data, so everybody who uses our data is mandated to share as well. So it's a mandate for solidarity. I don't want Google to use their data and then not giving back. That doesn't make any sense. That is appropriation. So that's what we try to do under data solidarity. So we are in that Data Governance Act as a data trust for data altruism. There is still a lot of smoke in that framework. The European Union is working very hard on bringing that framework to the market. We are set up as I said before, as a foundation with a board of trustees. We do everything grassrooted. We're also building now a physician association for AI. We have contacts to ambassadors in South Korea, Ethiopia, in Africa, in Europe, in different countries, and we try to create a grassroots movement for people who want that world to happen, that is fully democratized. And my first goal was to really convince a big pharma to join that mission. I said, do you want to share data that you never shared before? And they all said, like, you are nuts. And we managed now to win one of the top 20 pharma companies to join our project on breast cancer data, and they are going to share data with us. I have never seen any pharma company sharing data under an open license that leads to open source. So it's a mindset thing, and I invite all others that are here in the room to join that mission, because I think only through collaboration we can all profit from this. So we work with global communities in a global level. We share European values. We work locally, very local, and we work in a human-centric mode. And we do this together with patients, and we started campaigns with Victoria, which is the first breast cancer patient that we empowered. She became my co-founder. I know she's looking at home. And Victoria gave up her whole career and joined that mission and is building her database called Victoria 1.0. So she's asking all other breast cancer patients to join that mission and to build that database. And we use social media filters to do that. Or we have merchandise with "My boobs are not for sale" to start conversations. And doctors start wearing these t-shirts and hoodies to start the conversation about data literacy. Because we need a conversation. We need a societal debate if we're going to commodify data and democratize data in AI in healthcare. Because the outcomes can be very different. So with this, we want to try to create an open source way that leads to a digitalization framework for Europe that is based and embedded on our values. And everybody can join. We are super altruistic. We are non-profit. And we try to give access to data and build open sourced AI, just as we have seen over the last 20 years with software. It's nothing new. It's nothing to be afraid of. It will accelerate innovation. So with this, I thank you for your attention. If you want to follow and get more information, we have a free newsletter that you can subscribe on. Thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward for your questions. Thank you.
Mio Dottore è la piattaforma digitale che affianca i medici nella gestione dei pazienti e i pazienti